Hello, everyone, and welcome to NB Poli Pod. My name is Joanna Killen, and we are here on the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq, Pescatawamacati, and Willistic peoples, live in Mennequist, also known as St. John, New Brunswick. My name is Joanna. Welcome, Brent, to our first inaugural podcast episode that will be airing live, not live, but on Rogers TV, local news.
I know. I even brought my good shirt.
We are
most of the time I'm just running around here in a camouflage sweater. So welcome to everybody for our first inaugural live, like I said, live stream, but streaming podcast, video podcast, whatever you want to call it. We've been doing the NB Poli Pod now for over a year, and that has been a crazy journey that we couldn't have imagined. And so to get reached out to by Rogers TV I guess a couple weeks ago now. We were thrilled because, over the past year, we've done 48 episodes or 48 episodes. We've brought those podcasts, audio on all platforms. So anywhere you can listen to a podcast, you can go back and listen to these. And today what we want to do is really provide a new welcome to viewers. This is something, like I said, we started a year ago, and it came out of just you and I having these ridiculously long conversations.
Very long. And, while we both are city councilors here in St. John, we see this podcast as separate, completely separate from that. It is our opinions only. It is something that we're very passionate about, politics, journalism, analyzing things. It's just a big hobby, I guess, of ours that we wanted to turn into something. And we've met so many incredible people. We've had dozens of guests on here, and you can go back and, hear what they have to say. Hopefully we'll have some of them back on for this platform, because I think it's so important to showcase some of the ideas and solutions they have around some of the issues we face here in New Brunswick.
Yep.
And it's just so exciting to be able to hopefully reach some new folks. And we would love to hear from you. We do have our own Gmail and Patreon. So if you're interested in learning more about us and contacting us, we're super, super open to that. We'd love to hear feedback at nbpolypod@gmail.com.
Yeah, so we just launched that Patreon. This is ad free, by the way, folks. This is,
sure is.
You talk about, Joe. You talk about. We'll give our little introduction about who we are again here in a minute. But just to kind of give you an idea of the format of the podcast, we're about an hour, and we try very difficult to keep it to an hour. we try a lot. Sorry. Put the effort in to keep it there, but we don't always. It's difficult to keep it to that hour. We will interview guests, sometimes for the whole show, sometimes half the show. We've had guests from Ireland. We've had former cabinet ministers from Alberta. We've had authors. We've had data gurus. We've had former MLAs from this province. It's a wide-ranging podcast, and I think you call it a practice for us and a personal endeavor, but I think it's a discipline for everybody to find ways to engage in the New Brunswick political landscape. Like, one of the first things we say on our trailer for our audio podcast, and we'll say it again, is that New Brunswick just is not seen as this political bellwether or this political place of intrigue, if you will. It doesn't bring that scope. And so oftentimes New Brunswickers, we just feel like there's nothing going on, unless you're on New Brunswick Twitter, or you're a Politico and you go out of your way, you're not hearing these snippets about, New Brunswick on national news. And you're not, if you're following national level stuff, you're not seeing much of New Brunswick come up. And, even for me, I don't know about you, Joe, but when I studied political science in university, of course we studied New Brunswick politics, but even the presentation of New Brunswick politics didn't have this level of importance and intrigue. And I think that's, for us, one of the reasons why we want to shed a light, because it's very important what happens here. There is some strange realities with New Brunswick that are completely different than any other province. And we need to improve a lot of things.
Hey, we were one of the founding provinces in this entire country. And as the Atlantic Canadian historian, that was my focus. There are so many things that sprouted from here and came from here and caused Canada to be what it is. So, we're often, I think, seen as like the little redheaded stepchild down here in the corner. No Brunswick, the drive-through province. Like, I'm sure anybody here watching has heard it all and more. But we definitely are passionate about showcasing what's going on and trying to come up with solutions, because I think and believe that because of the size that we are, we have actually way more opportunity to move mountains, because we are only 800,000 plus people, which is just the size of Mississauga. So if you're thinking about trying to shift a boat that's the size of Ontario versus trying to shift a boat that's the size of here, and what's that song you've been listening to? 40 acres.
Give me 40 acres and I'll turn this thing around.
Right. But
the old Willis Brothers song.
We could do it in the downtown. So
that's right.
We could shift this thing around in a smaller way, in a more strategic way. So we talk lots about that, what the opportunities are for us as New Brunswickers to do things differently.
Yeah, that's so funny you bring up that Will Brothers song. Coming on TV, we want to broaden our horizon, our audience. We got about 250 kind of unique listeners over the past year.
Loyal.
Loyal, over almost 8,400 downloads. And so it's hard to say how many of those are unique, but my goodness, like, it's certainly a wider audience than we expected when we were like, you know what, screw this, let's just put this on the internet. And our conversations have to live somewhere, because, we were constantly like, oh my gosh, like, why don't more people know about this? Or what do people actually think about this? Does anybody even know about this stuff? And we'd be talking about it from municipal or provincial or federal issues. And so, a little bit more about us, I tend to be this, like, as far as characters go on the podcast, I tend to be a little bit more combustible, a little more blunt, and I wouldn't say necessarily any more bold than you are, Joe, but certainly I probably swear the most. So Rogers is going to have their hands full on bleeping out different words, I guess. We'll try to bring that in a little bit. I'm from Charlotte County. I was born in Moncton, raised in Charlotte County, live in St. John, where I'm a counselor, like you said. But you have this other approach, and I'm a poll guy. So, like,
yes,
when we come to polling, which we're going to hit on today again, apologies to listeners who listened last week, because you're going to hear a little bit of a repeat. Like I said, this is almost like a relaunch of the pod, loose relaunch. We are going to get into some new stuff, though, so don't worry. It isn't all rinse and repeat. But yeah, I do love polls, and you do not, but you do love the history and the microfilm section of the library. So
I sure do. I love going back and seeing the patterns of the past. And I am a born and raised St. Johner, 7 generations deep, potato famine / Lebanese diaspora from the late 1800s. I know my family's history backward and forward. I help other people understand theirs too, because shout out to the NB Genealogical Society, because they have given me such a wealth of knowledge on researching with what we have here in New Brunswick. It's super fascinating. And so I'm super passionate about this city and this province, always have been. I have, former politicians in my family. I have CBC reporters in my family. So I sort of come by this honestly, if you will. Like, it's been something I've grown up with and breathed for many years, and I'm almost 40. So it's a lot of, information and news that I've taken in over the years. So it's really fun to put this into practice with this podcast, and now to be, able to do this. It's really weird doing this on video, because we're usually, like you say, like in our sweatpants, like talking over the internet. So it's really cool to put on some nice duds today and actually present ourselves in a different format. So I'm big on how the history has dictated where we are today. And so sometimes I'll be showing you old newspapers, and we'll be walking through sort of how we got here and how we can change it.
And I think, what do we want from you guys, the listeners, the viewers now? We want your engagement. So we just, like we did, we just signed up our Patreon. That's one way you can do it. Like, some people will, we don't do ads. We don't ever want to do ads. We haven't been doing ads. We're not in it for the money.
No.
Some of this stuff costs us money, and, we're limited in our reach and how far we can promote this stuff without money. But, regardless, we're going to do it. And we do have people who are now giving us monthly donations. So first of all, shout out to our friend Fred, who has been on this podcast.
Yes, we love Fred.
He's one of our politicos. So we got 3 levels of people, supporters, and we love our supporters because supporters just want to help us promote it. Then we have our politicos, we call them, and the politicos are in it to do a little bit more. They want to quarterback some stuff. They want to see certain guests on the show or certain concepts or topics covered. And then we have our watchdogs, our political watchdogs. And there's only 5 slots available, and there's only 20 slots available for the politicos for now. We're limited in our time. We both have jobs. We're both on council. We both have kids.
Yes.
And so we have done I don't even know how we've done it over the past year to carve out the time every single week, well, almost every single week, to get this out there. And, we want to grow this thing for sure. And so, we're continuing on that trend, but our watchdogs are going to be a bit more of our inside crew. They're the ones we're going to be talking to throughout the week. We're going to be emailing back and forth, sharing information, kind of planning the schedule of this podcast. So if you're a watchdog or a politico, you're part of that group that's getting some insider trading information, if you will, on where we're going and who we're talking to. So, but what we want really overall is for hundreds and hundreds of New Brunswickers to find this valuable, to listen in every week, and to grow the level of competency we have and understanding we have about this system. Oftentimes people feel like debilitated by politics or polarized, right? We live in a time where it's like, wow, conservatives, Justin Trudeau couldn't, run a 2-car funeral, and he's the worst thing that's ever happened to this province since cancer arrived. And then you have, people on the other side saying, Pierre Poilievre is a consummate insider and hasn't done anything besides politician in his life, and how people vote for him, and he's going to cut everything. And there's no nuance there. Everything's more complicated than that, folks. I don't know what people think, but politics is not this clear cut and dry, straightforward thing that, only exists over here in Ottawa or Fredericton. Politics is in your everyday. You hit a pothole, politics. You see a person homeless, politics. You wait in the ER for 9 hours, politics. You go to the food bank, politics. I don't know what to tell anybody anymore. Politics is every single part of your life. And there are a lot of people out there who believe very different things than you might think is common sense or should be believed, or even supported by data and good information we have. And the only way we're going to sift that stuff is if we start talking about it and interviewing people who know more about it, and kind of going down the tunnel, if you will, of what is the implications of believing this thing or this policy, and what do we see in the day-to-day. So that's our hope. That's one hope, I guess.
We figured out that, in the evolution of politics, especially over the last, let's say 5 years, that the Trumpian nature of it has led people to whittle things down into sound bites, which is why we chose an hour-long format, right? Because we want to be able to unpack things fulsomely and not just be old man raging at sky situation from The Simpsons. So it is one of these things where it may seem long and long-winded, but the issue with the way things have been going is a lot of people have a license to just throw darts and daggers and that be the end of the conversation, when in reality there's so much nuance and there's so many reasons how we got here, which is why I love doing the historical piece, because we didn't just get here overnight. This has been something that's been ongoing. And we talk a lot about the last 40 years and the last 50 years and the dissolution of the public service. If you go back to last week, we talk a lot about that. And so, if there's ever anything that you pick up on in this, there's likely been an episode about it that goes even deeper into sort of some of the topics that we cover.
Yeah, agreed. And I'm going to put this up on the screen right now for people to see, just so that you, and I haven't done this before.
This will be,
I'm going to throw a banner up here. Here we go. So if you're looking to get at us or you're looking to support us, we'll put this here for now. We'll bring it back up later. You can email us at nbpolypod@gmail.com. You can go to patreon.com/nbpolypod, and you're going to find ways to get in touch with us or be in touch with us. And we're also on socials. So
Sure.
that is where we are. So there's the show. That's who we are. Where do we want to start today, Joe?
I mean, I say you introduce everybody to your polling, your love of polling. And I always get up in arms about polling because I feel like it's just such a moment in time, and trying to understand, like what I just said, trying to understand people in a broader way. It takes a lot more than just polling. So, but let's give you some space here.
So let's introduce polling here. I'm going to break it right down. What is a poll? A poll is something that groups, organizations do to try to take the temperature of people. And they'll do that by calling people. They'll do that by emailing people. They'll do that by mailing people. Like, it's not very common you see mail surveys anymore, but that used to be a pretty normal way of reaching out to people and getting their opinion. Text messaging happens now. So number of different ways that companies will do polling. Now, in New Brunswick, we're a tiny little province. We don't have a bunch of big polling groups that are out there getting paid by, and who pays for this information? It's mostly political parties. Sometimes third parties do. Sometimes you can get like organizations will have like polling as something they do to kind of demonstrate their competency, but they'll work for other organizations doing similar work in another area. So they might do like narrative research, for example, is a great one. They're here in the Atlantic Canada. They're one of the ones that does polling frequently here. They're one of the only ones.
Yeah.
And so that's who we're going to look at today. And narrative research can do all kinds of different things, right? They can poll people about your product. They can poll people about an idea. They can poll people about political parties. And that's one that they will put out, I don't think it's every quarter, but it might be every quarter, actually.
And you might see, like, the most probably one that's recognizable to you is that random text that you'll get. Yeah. And it's like, do you support the Conservatives? Yes, no, maybe so, kind of thing. And you send that back via text. Like, that's probably the most recent example. Like, I just got one the other day.
Yeah. And it's important to say that some polls are not, I won't just say biased. Some polls are compromised. So when you see that, hey, it's Stacey from the Progressive Conservative Party, or it's Brian from the Liberals, like whatever, when you see that and they ask you questions, it's important to note how they're asking you the question and what they're not asking. So I've seen one like, do you support Susan Holt or Blaine Higgs for Premier? And it's like, anybody going to ask if David Kuhn wants to be included
or
in
Alex
this?
White from the
or
NDP.
Alex White, the leader of the NDP, or the leader of the Greens, who actually have 3 seats and held the balance of power for 2 years in this province. Anybody going to ask that? Like, so sometimes these polls are by parties, right? Yes. And parties don't want you to think about anything else other than what they're putting in your window. And we're here to call BS on that. Because it's dishonest, it creates polarization, it mischaracterizes the other team, and it creates, this gap. So narratives is one of those ones that we'll do, and we'll talk about Canada 338 as well, and we'll talk about another podcast that's worth listening to that is videocast as well. Eric Grenier's podcast, The Writ, and Eric Grenier and Philip Fournier are kind of like let's say the academics of polling and the smartest kids in the class about it in this country.
The gurus.
Yeah, they know it inside and out. They do it for a living. They've worked in that field for years, and they're thought leaders on it. So,
and hey, it was a really exciting night when Eric Grenier covered the New Brunswick by-election. That was very cool.
And he's saying he might not do those again, but I hope he does, because it's interesting. When we had those by-elections, hearing Eric's comments back as it was unfolding before us, and you're seeing, the Green Party finished close seconds in some cases, and then surprising everybody and all this stuff. But okay, let's get into some polling. So I'm going to share my screen here so that folks can see what we're talking about. I won't leave it up forever, but we'll just leave it up so you can take a peek. This poll was done in February 28th. So if you're listening to this, folks, I'm sorry, but this is a good reason for you to potentially check out now, can you see that, Joe? Yeah, okay, here we go. So this is the narrative research. I'm just scrolling so people can see where it comes. We've got a sample size of about 400 people. We've got a decided voters out of those 400 New Brunswickers that are surveyed, they're 18 years plus. I don't know from looking at this exactly what the breakdown of how many, what the age groups are. So there is a little bit of a description here. You can go online and find this. You just Google narrative research, New Brunswick poll, February 28th. But out of decided voters, out of which there was 283 decided voters, that gives us a margin of error, by the way. So anytime you do a poll, we've been doing polling for 50, 60 years. There's going to be imperfections in it, and we've kind of figured out how to determine how likely or how close we're getting, depending on the sample size, and depending on how many decided voters there are compared to undecided voters. So in this case, we've got a margin of error about 6 points, which means that it's pretty insignificant any gaps that you see, and a lot that you can't really glean a whole lot. Now, what we do see on this is the Liberal Party overall is a 40% preferred party, or who people would vote for out of those decided voters, right? There's 20% of people who are undecided or don't know. And, that's pretty significant, right? So you think of 20% of the voting population in New Brunswick, those are thousands and thousands of people. And so we see the Liberals at 40, we see the Conservatives at 34, and we see the Green Party at 15, the NDP at 8, and the People's Alliance at 2. Out of decided voters. So again, with a margin of error of 6%, that means that the Liberal Party may or may not be ahead of the Progressive Conservatives at all. But this is the second poll that shows a pretty significant lead, 6 points for the Liberals. So, out of premiers, 31% say Susan Holt would be a better leader. 22% say Blaine Higgs is a better leader or should be preferred as premier. David Kuhn at 17%, Alex White at 5%, Rick DeSonia at 4%. None of the above 4 and don't know, 16%. So again, a lot of people don't know. And that margin of error is 5 points. So it's polling. Why do we care about this? I'm gonna get rid of this and stop sharing. Why do we care about this? To me, it's pretty simple. People pick politics like they do pants, right? We've said that on this podcast before. You say it often. Sure, and that's because a lot of us don't know, like, who is
depends on the morning. It depends on the morning.
Who is the better person? And and people have opinions like, well, if I vote for this party, then the other party might get in, and therefore I can't do that, and I'm scared of that, and I'm going to vote for the lesser of two evils. And so I think we're here to stand against the vote splitting attitude, first of all. Yeah. We can't support that on this podcast. You should. I know we don't like to deal in shoulds, but you should vote for the party that you believe in, that you truly think has better solutions, or, more appropriate leaders, or a better track record of important work in the province.
And like who you feel will represent you. Because there's, a bit of a culture of once people get in, they stop engaging. And so if you know and trust that the person you're electing is someone you can communicate with and have sort of an open dialogue with, then you should be looking at those types of things and the person who will be representing you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Excuse me. So it's one of those things where with this breakdown in polling, it suggests that there's a lot that people are torn on this.
Yes.
But I would suggest too, this poll does not seem to be catching certain news that's occurring in this province. So to kind of recap, the Progressive Conservative Party is literally on fire. It's literally collapsing beneath itself. We're talking Richard Hadfield days. We will try to go back and, make comparisons to, previous eras. We're not necessarily super long in the tooth, Joe and I. Like, we're in our 30s, but we're both holding office currently. We've both run provincially before, and we're both students of it. So when we can, we will try to make those historical comparisons. But I mean, if you remember under Hatfield, when everything was going down, he got caught with marijuana, and he was being bullish on certain topics and, going to war with certain cabinet ministers in his own cabinet. And then all of a sudden he started bleeding politicians, people who would run for him that are like, no, we're not running this time. No. And then it's just one person after another. And he got smoked. Smoked by the Liberals.
It was the red wave, if I do recall.
Yeah. And it was our lawyer from Miramichi who now runs a tech company and does TD stuff. It was
illustrious Frank McKenna.
Yeah, it was those days, right? And
and New Brunswick loves a pattern. New Brunswick loves repeating itself historically.
I know.
And so seeing this is just so illuminating because we're witnessing it like week over week where, we just saw Daniel Alain say he wasn't going to run. Another podcaster, Jeff Carr, MLA Jeff Carr, who has a show over on Choke TV, has also said he's not running.
Or CHKO. I always say Choke TV too.
Yeah.
But
I think it's like a Charlotte County thing.
Yes.
And so, he has a podcast, but he's also declared he's not running. So we're seeing these like tried and true PC folks who've been in it. Like Daniel Alain was a deputy minister. Like he was a bureaucrat before he actually got into the legislature. And so we're seeing them fall off. Which for the PCs, like these are big losses, big losses.
Yeah, there's 19 riding presidents that called for Higgs's resignation. There is, there was a potential lawsuit where the Hampton riding was considering taking their own party to court because of how they appointed the candidate that's running in Hampton, Fatine Grisecci, who is this like authored Christian nationalist and.
And out of 49 seats, a letter just came out from she's the president, Erica Hashi of the PC party, saying that they only had, and they weren't saying only, they were saying we have 18 confirmed candidates, but 18 out of 49 is not great numbers when you're in the election year currently.
8 months from an election.
Yeah.
And that's pretty uncommon, but even the Liberals are struggling. The Liberals
but they're confirming, like there's people almost every week. You're seeing a new nomination. You're seeing somebody else come out. So we're not seeing that same momentum with the PCs, but we are seeing it with the Greens and the Liberals.
Yeah, the Greens have 50% of their candidates, so they have 24 candidates confirmed, and have said they basically have a full slate. They're just finalizing the due diligence on certain candidates. And so, what does this mean? Like, with Higgs being so unpopular in his party, Higgs's national approval rating is the worst in the country. And that
came from a poll.
It did. Yeah. Yes. So it tells people who don't necessarily watch the news every day, why are these polls good? It tells people that people who do watch the news and do engage and do answer polls, who are people who care about this stuff a little more, are not approving of this and not supporting it. And, from the party, a lot of these PCs that are stepping down, they're just saying things like the party is not recognizable. I didn't join this party to champion these issues and these things. I mean,
where did the progressive go and progressive conservative? Those kinds of statements. Yeah.
Yeah. And, what are those issues that the conservatives have been bullish on? Well, they've been, insistent that we only have good financial stewardship. They have been insistent on reforming nebulous policies that protect kids in school, like Policy 713, but framing it as if it's about parents' rights. And, as a person who's gone through separation and had to sit in court with regards to what the situation will be with my children and how we share custody, I can tell you, I don't have rights. There's no rights I have to my kids or to I have obligations under the law. And
responsibilities.
I have responsibilities to provide food, shelter, love, security, opportunity. I mean, in some cases for them. And so this is a misnomer, and it's caused a lot of strife within the party, but it's attracted some newbies to the party like Fatine, like Phil Hutchins, who are these, Phil's a pastor who got arrested for, going against lockdown measures and having events with no masking and refusing to follow any of the rules, ironically set out by Premier Higgs, now potentially running for him in a place like St. John Harbor. Faytine, like you said, is a national, has had an international profile with very well-known Christian nationalists. What do we mean by Christian nationalists? These are Christians who believe that the country should be taken over for the church, for Christianity. It should answer to Jesus.
That we need to be saved, that the reason we're having issues is because we're not following the word of the Lord.
Yeah, that's right.
When we, I know I grew up with a major lesson, especially once you get to the university level, of the separation of church and state. Like, it's a very basic principle that Canada was built on and came to embody so that we could be this multicultural place that, accepted everyone and anyone who had any sort of religious, like, there should be no one true religion. That's not how this world works.
And why is that? Now, there's might be listeners to this who are like, well, I don't know, I think Christianity is the right religion and all. And I certainly, hey, look, I used to be in the church. I used to be a leader. I went to divinity school. I spent 7 years out of a 12-year time. I converted to Christianity at 17. I was in the church leadership for 7 years. I was in the Brethren in Christ. I was in the Methodist movement. I was in the Baptist church. I was in the Anglican church. I was in the Charismatic church. I was in the prayer movement. I was in the Charismatic movement. Like, I was in a lot of different church groups. And I can say, like, I get it. There are a lot of reasons to look to the Bible and look at it and say, yeah, look, like, if we do these things, the Lord says that he'll bless the land. If we turn from our sins, the Lord will forgive us. And it's like, so we're, the reason that there's problems in this world is sin. But don't forget, as soon as a group or a person believes that they hear the word of God, it allows them to unleash a world of evil in the name of God, because every single person is fallible. And every single person, even if you believe in the word, sees in part. And, we have this church and state separation because of things like the Crusades and the Spanish Inquisition and residential schools, where, I mean, I'm sorry, but like, if you're somebody who thinks that the church is somehow the best place to build a state and to build a society of diverse people and unique people, history's not on your side.
Absolutely not. And listen, like, you and I are right now in a program with the Cody Institute, which is named after a Catholic priest who did a whole bunch of, community asset-based community development, who helped start cooperative movements, who helps people unionize, and all. Like, we're not saying the church's intentions are all terrible and all bad. We really need to bust that myth, because that's one that sort of goes around about us, if you will. We're very much,
we've been taken to court for it.
Sure have.
Well, not taken to court. We've been threatened with legal action. Because
to say that we're anti-Christian. No. Yeah. There's many lovely things about Christianity, and ones that we practice ourselves in certain ways. So, that is a total misnomer. It is just, again, about that piece where it becomes the one true doctrine for everybody living in this country. And that is absolutely not okay.
No. So we got to figure out how to work well together. And the best way to work together and to build something is if we believe in each other, and if we believe that we have equality with one another, and if we seek for deeper and deeper ways to achieve equity amongst each other. I mean, that's our podcast opinion. That's our position, I guess we'll say. That equity, we're an equity seeking thought exercise, the conversationalists. So this poll, like, back to the poll, we'll wrap it up with that before we move on to the next thing. It's showing us that there is some separation occurring between the PCs and the Liberals. It's showing us that there is some growing momentum for the Green Party. They're up a few points. They're down a few points in some ways, like from a couple of years ago, but they're up a few points in others. But I don't think the poll is properly reflecting how much separation there is between PCs within their own party. Because oftentimes when parties have distaste for their leader, they just don't show up to the polls. But when there is absolute frustration with their leader, and there's anger at their leader, like we saw with the 19 riding presidents like we see with the MLAs that are stepping down and refusing to run for them, like we see with popular opinion and things like that.
Yeah.
They will actually go out of their way to make sure that leader no longer exists. So what does that mean? I don't know about you, Joe, but I don't know very many progressive conservatives that will go vote for the Liberals.
I know. And that's, because they've been raging against the Liberals for, like, our last episode was like rage against the dying of the light, like same energy. Yeah. Where, Liberals just spend. And, then the PCs have to come pick up the pieces. Like we go historically, that's been the way the ping pong has ping-ponged. Yeah. Where everyone feels like they're cleaning up after the other. And so it's been very rare that we've had a minority government. And when we did, Higgs blew that up.
And it got a lot done. I still to this day, when the Greens held the balance of power, my goodness, did you see some interesting stuff in committees, some interesting legislation being proposed. And so, it is going to be, where do those disenfranchised, angry progressive conservatives go? Can't see them going to the Liberals.
They've been rage farmed very, very efficiently by Pierre Poilievre as well.
Yes.
And we have this unique situation in New Brunswick where if you look across the rest of Canada, the Liberal Party provincially has pretty much been decimated either by mostly by the NDP, and then these new iterations like the UCP in Alberta of the, conservative movement. So we are such, this is why I love the New Brunswick politics space, because we are such a unique situation. Even in PEI, like they had a big swelling of Greens and now pendulum back to the PCs. So the distaste for Liberals, like if my mom was here the other day saying, did you hear that they're calling Trudeau True Dope now? I'm like, I didn't hear that one, but they have all
because he legalized marijuana.
Right. And just inflation. And they've come up with all these very catchy things that I think are getting downloaded onto the Liberals that at a provincial level, because there's just so much intertwining that happens and whatnot.
Yeah. And the Liberal Party is the most successful Westminster parliamentary party in the world, right?
Yeah.
So there's dozens of Westminster style parliaments that exist around the world.
Thanks, imperialism.
Thank you to colonial Britain.
Yeah.
And within that, the Liberals are the most successful. They have held power at the federal level in Ottawa for longer than any other party. But in the past 10, 15 years, there has been a complete 360. So you'll remember the orange crush of Jack Layton, for one of the first times in history, turning the Liberals into a third party. In Ontario, the Liberals aren't even an official party. There is no competitive Liberal Party outside of New Brunswick and Nova Scotia and Newfoundland. And Nova Scotia does not look like it's returning to the Liberals anytime soon. Tim Hust is still doing fairly well. Andrew Fury looks like he is going to lose in Newfoundland. The Liberals are a third place party in PEI. So what does that mean for New Brunswick and Susan Holt?
Yeah.
I said out of the gate, if she can raise $1 million her first year, it'll show that there's people who really believe in her as, this monumental politician who's going to do big things. We haven't seen that. Fundraising numbers for Liberals are low. Candidates look pretty status quo. Candidate selection and type looks pretty status quo, mostly men so far.
Oh, yeah, happy International Women's Day, by the way, to all you women politicos out there.
Yeah,
we love you. True. To know you is to love you. But yeah, it's true. We're happy that we could see New Brunswick's first woman premier in power.
Potentially.
But I really, really would love a minority government. I don't think anybody deserves to rule with a majority at this point. There's so much mess that needs to be cleaned up in a cohesive, collaborative manner. Yes. Not in the manner of one person knows all and thus will be our savior. That has literally led us nowhere in the last 40 to 50 years, besides where we are.
Yeah, and we have some of the worst outcomes in the country still on healthcare, on food security, on shelter, on rising rents, on homelessness growth, on, wages. And it's just, anyway.
There's a lot.
There's a lot
to figure out. And we're not going to do that with, any one party saying they have all the answers.
Yeah.
We're just not.
So another, common feature you'll hear from this is we're a minority government favoring, we're an equity seeking bunch here. Mm-hmm. We're a minority government seeking bunch here. I think we'd both probably be proportional representation.
Absolutely. And
Folks.
I know, and I love to talk to people about this. And I just had a discussion the other day where someone brought up a very solid point about how, with proportional representation, you may end up with someone that is, at a distance to you. But ultimately, I do think that if you can believe in the party that you're voting for and believe that they're going to choose good people to represent, then PR can really, really work. Like it can be a place where you're solidly aware of what you're voting for.
Yeah. And by the way, like people who think, well, if first past the post allows for the candidate that is picked to be the candidate that goes there. Because, okay, for people who don't know this, some forms of proportional representation, what happens is you vote for your local person, and whoever wins that, like if it's, let's say Joe and I are running against each other, and I'm running for the gray party, and Joe, you're running for the, I don't know, Z party. Doesn't matter. Let's say I win the most votes locally. But let's say Joanna wins the second most votes, and overall the Z party that you represent, let's say it takes not a majority, but a pretty high percentage of the vote. Well, in order to make sure that the seats reflect people's votes in the legislature, then there will be people that are brought in as not alternates, but as secondary candidates, and the party will pick them. So the Z party will say, okay, Joanna is our top pick for a candidate, and then here are the 10 others. So if we get enough of the overall percentage of the vote, these 5 or 6 candidates are going to go also to the legislature. So you might have 40 seats in the legislature that are made up of local candidates, and you might have 20 seats in that legislature that are made up of secondary candidates to make sure that the voice of the people is represented. If 40% of the people vote for the Green Party, then they should take 40% of the seats. That's the thinking. But again, don't forget, parties are not public groups. They are private clubs.
Yeah.
You don't, just because you vote for a local candidate, that candidate is not able to represent you, especially if you are a whipped vote.
Yeah.
Right. And so
just to let's explain a whipped vote, because two parties, the PCs and the Liberals, prescribe to whip voting, meaning if you are going to be part of their party, you're going to vote the way that the leader and the leadership of that party say you're going to vote.
Yeah.
So the reason we saw such an upset with 713 and the 6 rebels, policy 713, was because those 6 chose to vote against the whipped vote of the leadership.
And those six would be Andrea Mason, Dorothy Shepherd, Trevor Holder, Jeff Carr,
Ross Wetmore,
and
Daniel Alain.
So those are MLAs, cabinet ministers, most of them. With the progressive conservative under
and their punishment, if you will, for going against the leadership was to be booted out of cabinet.
Yeah,
because they were all cabinet ministers pretty much.
So you might say
they were shuffled out.
And you might say that was them representing their constituents appropriately.
Right. Exactly.
You might say that was the truth. And so what does that tell us about a whip party vote? That you're not allowed to represent your constituents.
No,
you've got to represent the party.
So like Liberals and PCs, and the Liberals just went through this where they had a biennial, which is a exercise where the club, if you will, gets together, and anyone can sign up for the club and go and pay to go. And then they decide whether or not they're going to worry about, say, proportional representation and whip votes or not. And they turned all that down categorically. But the Greens, on the other hand, small and mighty as they are, believe in not whipping votes. So there is nobody there telling you must vote this way or the other way. So that's why, they may be considered so much more dangerous, because they, can vote on their conscience and pride themselves on that. So, but the other two, there's consequences when you don't, number one. And number two, like, you may find that your local representative is unable to represent the grander interests of your community because they have to go with what the leadership, also known as the people who probably aren't from your area, what they're thinking and how they believe that this should go.
Which is why you might argue that we have such corporate favoring policies in this province.
Yeah.
Right. Especially for like, the representatives from St. John, we've talked about this on this pod so many times. It is almost laughable, the level of difference of policy and taxation that is expected of our industrial overlords, we often call them here. But it's true. We just found out in committee last week that $25 million of subsidies are given to pulp and paper mills every year for power bills. I don't know about you, but I don't get a subsidy on my power bill. And, if you're going to tell me that $25 million should be handed over to, the interests of billion-dollar corporations, we better have some reasoning for that. And the reasons that they will say is because it protects competition and it makes us world leaders and all this stuff.
And jobs.
And jobs.
And I can show you 40 years of newspaper articles that say the exact same messaging.
Yeah.
That goes back as far as these people's, father, basically, who when the government made him mad, he moved all of his money to Bermuda.
Yeah.
So like this has been the tactics of corporations across the globe for many, many years.
Yeah.
And and it's your dollars, right? It's your tax dollars that are going there to help prop up
their profits.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so like, we have NB Power is the biggest risk to the public treasury. Our money is being used to do things for us, and some of it we don't agree with, some we do agree with. I don't find anybody out there on the street. If you did a referendum on corporate subsidies, would never happen. Why does it happen? Because those corporations can pay to make presentation after presentation after presentation to government in committee and to politicians directly and in their offices. And you and I, we don't have the same organization and same single-minded interest to go to government and make the case for alternatives. And so it's haphazard, right? But if you're a politician and you go to Fredericton every week and you're constantly seeing these well-spoken presentations telling you that if you don't put these policies in place to protect they would never say protect corporate profits, but they would say to promote corporate well-being and industrial growth and all this stuff, then we're going to fall behind and it's going to be, chaos and Armageddon economically. You're going to buy into that in some senses, unless you have a strong backbone and unless you have a strong belief set and unless you're willing to go and do your own research. And our research tells us that this level of corporate subsidy, not just in forestry, in oil, in a range of them, even in rail, for, mostly Irving companies, but also, other companies like McCain's and other companies like Cook's, from down home where I'm at in Charlotte County. These subsidies often do not promote the New Brunswick economy. They get used to grow that company corporately, globally, and it doesn't always support us. So
it's a whole trickle down economics theory in action, really.
Yeah, and it's been disproven every single time somebody actually goes to look it up. But it's an easy thing to buy into for people. It's low energy thinking, and so it's one of those pieces where we'll talk about the tax system on this pod as much as we can. But if you're a proportional representation person, these are some of the things in the way, because if PR were to come, the ability for corporations to get their way would be diminished, because the parties would have to collaborate more with one another. And those parties that don't believe in that, like the Green Party, won't even take donations from like billionaires or Irvings or corporations like that. So some parties have made that their fight, and others have benefited pretty magnificently from it. And that's both the Liberals and the PCs over the years.
Absolutely. And, like I say, history is so important here, because this has been like, we have more billionaires per capita living and breathing and working here than the rest of the country. Mm-hmm. We're only 800,000 people. So to have 4 active billionaires is really out of proportion. Yep. So, and that is just such a very disproportionate situation, big gap, especially when we should be thriving with 4 billionaires in our midst. And you'll often hear us compare us to Alberta, who seems to be even, more conservative than we are, but they actually charge appropriate tax to those who are industrial players. So we'll probably spend another episode updating everyone on where we're at with tax reform, because and it's probably the most important issue in New Brunswick that you never hear about. And municipal reform as well, and you're actually seeing it in Sussex. Poor Sussex. Oh my gosh, heart goes out to everybody there. They need to come up with like $38 million for a flood mitigation system, and they don't have it.
Of course
so as a tiny little municipality, they're never going to be able to pay for that. So there needs to be some serious shifting, and like the industry in our midst has caused the climate change that has caused the flooding. So it's one of these scenarios where they don't have any levers to pull to protect their citizens from the implications of climate change. And it's a direct result of the fact that there's instead of them getting charged 25 million in say like climate mitigation tax, let's call it, they're getting $25 million in subsidies from us.
And then we could go on about other policies that favor that separate us from other countries. You mentioned Alberta. I joke about this. You took the city of St. John and dropped it in Alberta with all the same advantages that it has in St. John, all the same realities. But the tax system that Alberta has, the municipality alone would have like a $14 to $15 million bigger budget, and the province would probably get another 10 million on top of that to fund. Alberta has the most funding per capita for social services in the country.
Shocking,
people think of them as the most libertarian, the Texas of Canada. They fund their programs, their social services more than Quebec. And it's because you can't do business in Alberta for free. You got to pay to play. Not here, not the same way anyway. But yeah, the tax piece that you're talking about, we had a great guest. You can go back on our podcast and listen, audio, not visual. Maybe we'll get him back here. Jerry Awanas, former tax assessor. So if you're pissed at your property tax assessments, go listen to that podcast. If you want to get brought to a place where you have a good grasp on why that is the way it is, and what is different about it than other places, because Jerry used to be a tax assessor as well as an elected official. He was a mayor, right? And in Alberta. And he came here and also worked for Service New Brunswick doing tax assessment for Service New Brunswick. And he can tell you a lot of the differences and a lot of the gaps and, how it leads to some of these problems. And who's interested in keeping it that way. Yeah,
it's fascinating stuff. And he's got solutions. I made a TikTok recently about, because the campaign manager for the PCs was saying, there's no solutions coming from the Greens or Liberals on affordability. And hopefully everyone who is applicable has applied for their $300 that will just save us all. Being sarcastic. But he is saying there's no solutions. But there's so many solutions out there that we've talked about on this podcast. And Jerry's episode is one. And our lovely political patron, Fred LaForge's company, Farmer's Truck episode is another one around food access. So
housing, we've done 5 or 6 podcasts just devoted to housing solutions.
Yes. There are solutions. And like we said at the top of this episode, we are small enough to implement them. And we have enough surpluses over the last 3 years to implement them.
$1 billion surplus over the last, every year almost, for 3 years for 800,000 people.
I know. We'd each have $100,000. God. My math's probably wrong there. Girl mathing. Happy Women's Day. But it is one of those things where you feel, we sometimes feel like we're hitting our head against the wall, but that's why we want to grow this movement and grow our audience and hopefully get everyone thinking about these things, because we are small and mighty enough to right this ship and do well by everybody in this province, in our minds, hearts, and thoughts, basically.
Yeah, we'd all have $1,250 if we split that $1 billion up. Just so you know, I did the math. But let's just say we took out children who we're not going to give money to, and let's say we took out people who are making already $100,000 or more a year per household. We'd be down to like 300,000 people. So we could be getting a fair bit of money there if we wanted to. But yeah, so I mean, healthcare system needs help. Teachers are crying for help. We often talk about privatization and that thinking around that. The market's going to save it all, and it's like you don't have to look any further than housing to see how the market is not free. It is dumb. It is stupid because it'll pay. I've said this before. It'll pay a tech developer, $150,000 a year to develop some new stupid app for this that I don't need, that nobody needs, but we can market properly and get people to buy. And yet we can't pay to properly coordinate shelter distribution in this country. And we just allow the market to build what it wants, where it wants, and charge what it wants. And now none of us can afford it. So pretty dumb, because there's nothing worse for an economy than lack of shelter. And there's nothing worse for like political cohesion than lack of shelter for people or shelter insecurity. So, but yeah, we'll continue to talk about these things. And if you're going to, bear with us and come along for the ride, this is the type of conversation we're going to have.
Yeah, and we'll bring more folks in to keep it interesting. And if any of you, we usually do a mailbag situation, so please write into us. We would love to hear from you, or tweet at us, or comment. These are the ways to get in touch, and we would love to feature you on here with your thoughts. So.
Yep. We didn't get to, I wanted to talk about the political compass. We didn't do that. We'll get into some cool stuff in the future, because that's part of our mission here, is nuance the conversation, show people that there are different ways of looking at it. There's not just one kind of school of thought that everybody's sort of just tampering with. There's many that could make differences. And there's lots of places that we can talk about in the world that do it differently and have better results. So that's the fun part, is like, hey, actually different is possible and better is possible.
Absolutely. And we are so happy to be here on Rogers TV.
Yeah.
We appreciate the team here in St. John who found us and wanted to make our first anniversary really memorable by bringing us into a new platform. And we'll be on YouTube. So you'll be able to navigate to Rogers TV's local YouTube, and we'll make sure to post those links too on our socials. So if you don't get to see us on channel 10, that you can still catch us online. So really
Beautiful.
appreciate everybody, and thank you so much for tuning in.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good week. See you in 7 days.